right, I call the Redevelopment Commission to order. Is there any discussion about the June 5th, 2018 minutes?
No.
Then I would entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of the June 5th, 2018 Redevelopment Commission meeting as written.
I'll second.
Has been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the June 5, 2018 Redevelopment Commission. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None heard. We passed unanimously. Next up, we will hear Community Advisory Committee discussion, which will be led by our Commission Executive Director, Layla Aman, and Allison Wicks.
Okay. Well, good evening, Mayor, councilors, commissioners. I suppose in this context, Layla Aman, your Community Development Director. I'd like to take a brief moment before we dive in to formally introduce you to Ms. Allison Wicks. Allison just joined our team yesterday, so she will be doing tonight's presentation. She didn't know that. But, just kidding. So Allison is serving as our new development project manager. She will be taking on many of the responsibilities that I held in my former position. So this is your first chance to meet her, but I expect that you will see her often. Alice comes to us from Prosper Portland, formerly the Portland Development Commission. She has a good amount of experience working in a similar environment. She most recently worked in the Lentz Urban Renewal District. Some of which we're going to talk to you about tonight was frankly inspired by some of the work that Allison led while she was at Prosper, and certainly while I was there as well. So I'm really thrilled to have Allison join the team. I'll be down to doing 2 jobs instead of 3, so that will help me a lot too as I take on some newer responsibilities, including this position as well, working with you as the Redevelopment Commission. So tonight's exercise is fairly simple. We wanted a chance to convene. It's been a while since the committee met. I think that the last time that you met as a commission was to adopt the budget. As we start to enter into the budget process and looking at this on the calendar, I thought it was a good time to give you an update as to where we are financially. I started, as I dig into this new role, looking at what we're projecting to do over the next few years. So I have some thoughts and questions to share with you about where we are in terms of our budget and some recommendations that I hope you'll discuss and advise. Then also discussing as well a strategy as we move forward with implementing the Urban Renewal Plan. So the Urban Renewal Plan was adopted by the City Council in 2016, established bylaws in 2017. Since that time, we've been essentially gaining increment. So where we are today is we currently have $270,480 as of the end of fiscal year 2019. Councilor Beatty asked, what did we project? And what we projected was approximately $259,000.
Oh, okay.
So we're tracking pretty close, if not a little above. So that's encouraging.
Oh.
It's really interesting because when we passed that and did the original projection, we didn't have the, whatever it was, the vertical housing tax credit, which preempts sort of
Taking it away.
Yeah, that's a
some
good
of the
point.
funds from
Right.
this.
Well, but the one project to have used it isn't paying taxes yet, right?
No, this is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So that shows that we're tracking a little bit above what we anticipated. Generally, when you do these kinds of plans, you're pretty conservative in those estimates, so I think we're pretty pleased with what we're seeing. So looking at that, I examined the budget, and we were, according to the last fiscal year budget, anticipating issuing debt in 2021. And just to give a little primer on what that means is that we can issue debt for future anticipated property tax returns. So part of when you do a 30-year plan, you do estimates going out for 30 years. You establish what you call a maximum indebtedness, and the city can issue a debt up to that amount, and we're somewhere in the I think it's $92 million. Because you're getting increment yearly, you don't really have, like I said, after 2 years of our program being in place, we have just shy of 300 grand. So you issue debt in order to start advancing projects sooner. The idea being you're catalyzing development, you're getting more projects built in order to leverage additional property taxes. So we anticipated issuing debt in next year effectively, so that would be July of 2020. This is fiscal year 2020-21. Fiscal year 2021 starts in July of 2020. And in looking through that, given the multiple priorities that our department has, things that are happening in our downtown, I'm recommending that we consider pushing that out an additional year. I will say that we do have budget discussions around this, so this is not the only time we'll talk about it, but I thought since we had the opportunity to discuss this with you as a commission, to let you know that's kind of where my mind is going, but I'm certainly open to hearing more. Paired with that, what that allows us to do, it gives our team another year to think about how do we want to actually move forward with implementation of our urban renewal plan. And one of the things that I thought was really successful in Lentz, and that what we did also in the Gateway Urban Renewal District in Portland, is we established what we call the 5-year action plan. We did these as we closed out districts there. I'm recommending we do this as we move into our district. And what it does is that we've established a 30-year plan. There's a lot of aspirational projects in here that may take a very long time before we realize them. But there's also projects that have sort of a near-term benefit. So a lot of things that we haven't been able to do in our downtown, for example. Some of the projects we've noted in there are tenant improvement grants, things that we can help local businesses with, other things that we can do to improve the commercial environment in our downtown. So what I would recommend that we do is we consider the idea of putting together a 5-year action plan to implement our plan. And that would be something that we can discuss here tonight, and certainly welcome Allison to chime in on her experience in Lentz. But it's a way to engage the community to say, here are the projects that we approved when we did this plan. Things change, things have been implemented. So Kronberg Park was one of the projects that was in here. We've built that with other resources. And we may also be able to work with our engineering department and other partners to find other additional resources that we can say, okay, over the next 5 years, there are other resources we can use to build the infrastructure, and then we can work towards building on the sort of property side of it as well. So if we can work with engineering and kind of coordinate with them around what they're doing, and we're doing that holistically already as a city, but this provides another funding source for us to do development and help incentivize the type of development we want to see in our district, which is primarily downtown, the two spines, it's Washington and Harrison to central Milwaukie. So this would be an effort that would be a community-based effort. We would develop a short-term action plan. So we would identify specific projects. We would identify specific funding sources with our project partners, and we would hold a community forum around that. So we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel. We're looking at a 30-year plan and saying, based on kind of where we are, where we're going in the next 5 years, here is I think a reasonable amount of work that we feel that we can accomplish based on the amount of resources that we have. So that's where the debt comes into play. So issuing debt next year, there are costs associated with that. So there are costs for issuance. We do gain interest when we have that resource, but I would say we probably don't want to issue debt until we have a clear sense of what are the priority projects we want to implement. So what this will do is gives us a little bit of time to kind of strategize around how we may want to do an action plan. As part of our bylaws, we do have to establish a community advisory committee. And so given what we discussed tonight, staff will come back to you with a process for how we would like to work with you to establish that community advisory committee. Your bylaws establish kind of the types of folks that will be asked to be part of that group. So that would be, in my mind, the first step is to say, okay, we are interested in this concept. We'll come back with a more fully baked approach, and then a timeline and strategy for getting our community our community advisory committee in place so that we can establish a 5-year action plan. So those are my thoughts on that.
Okay.
Projects in the 5-year action plan would come from our 30-year build-out plan,
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point.
taking it increments by increments, which
Yes.
makes sense, kind of
Yeah.
more definitive, know where you're going type situation.
Yeah, exactly, Councilor Parks. And that's, I think, one of the things that we found, and maybe you could talk a little bit about this, that was successful in Lentz. That was a district that was 20 some odd years old when we did the action plan. And so there were things that didn't happen, there were things that did happen, and it was a way to bring the community together around an end game as that district went into its retirement.
Yeah, so I'll talk. So nice to meet all of you. So I was at Prosper Portland Development Commission for 8 years. So both did the planning process and the implementation for the Lentz 5-year action plan. So that finishes up summer 2020. And I think that the action plan is a really great tool, 5-year action plan, because it creates kind of a more digestible to-do list, both for staff and for the community. It sort of can help hold both sides accountable of what are we going to get done in the next 5 years, and can help you have kind of an ongoing conversation with the community about your urban renewal plan. And then it can also be really helpful for looking at what other city projects or parks projects or other projects are kind of on that shorter horizon, and then coordinate the urban renewal resources at the same time.
So I want to just trying to get my head around the debt side of it. So whether it's 2021 or 2022 or 2023, we wouldn't issue debt for the whole 90 million. We would issue debt for what we think we can spend in the next 3 years or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what was approved last budget cycle was $2 million. So what we would want to do is obviously work with the Office of Finance and figure out, understanding what we're projecting for property tax revenue. We'll have a few years in our back pocket by that point. And so what we'd want to do is estimate a reasonable amount of debt that we feel comfortable with. So that's obviously a decision that you would make, but in no way would we want to issue that amount of money at this time, because it will take so long to pay that back that typically you kind of break it up into little chunks. And so we do a couple million here, see how that works. Then you come back, see how the district is performing. Because there are examples where districts just don't actually meet the assessed value projections that you have. So we experienced this in Gateway. We had a maximum indebtedness, and I can't remember the number, but we were about 2/3 of the way there. The development just didn't happen. So in my mind, I think it makes sense to be conservative in our debt issuance, but we also want to do enough that we can have an impact. And I think as the time that I've been here working with our downtown community, I think there's a lot of interest and potential for us to be a good partner for particularly small businesses or emerging businesses. So as we move into our community is changing quite a lot, and so ensuring that local businesses can still remain. There are things that we can do that are smaller scale than the big multi-million-dollar projects that have a major impact. So I think that issuing a conservative amount of debt first, seeing kind of how it works, is, to me, a reasonable approach.
And so logistically or whatever, how does it work? So say it's $2 million or $3 million. We issue the debt, and then the next years of increment that comes in pays off that debt, or we pay off that debt over a 20-year cycle or something?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, so that would be, so $2 million debt. we could get from a bank, we could do for full faith and credit. So it depends on whatever the amortization is for our repayment of those. We don't necessarily have to dedicate all of the increment to that because you want to keep continuing to build the pot as you're doing it. So we would establish a debt service schedule that makes sense, obviously under the advice of our finance director.
Okay.
The only thing that occurs to me is we are very likely entering a recession in the very near future. We've all experienced the, whatever it was, 45% cost increase of construction over the last 3 years or 4 years, whatever it's taken. I suspect we might see some lightening of that load a little bit during the recession. It would make sense if we have things that are going to be construction projects, perhaps to do as many of them during the downturn as are feasible, just to save that amount of money, if indeed the prices do go down. So that was one comment. And then the other piece, I was trying to remember the list of things, but was burying the utilities downtown on the list?
There were, and I can reference it if needed, but there were improvements to downtown that was included in the plan.
Because that's our most expensive PARS item, which causes projects to make decisions that they wouldn't maybe necessarily otherwise make, or maybe keeps projects from happening, because I think we figured it out, it's what, $1 million a block face?
Oh, I thought it was 300,000 a block face, so it was $1 million a
remember?
block.
Yeah.
Like
Is that
4 sides
the
of a
deal?
block. Oh,
Okay.
Yeah, Councilor Bates is
That's-
right. Yeah.
So in any case, you just added $1 million to the cost of a building if there's aerial wires on all 4 block faces. That, to me, is the kind of thing that's going to spur development,
Right.
and seems like also more cost efficient to do all at once.
right.
Rather than doing it a block at a time.
Right.
As a building goes in, just go through and do the whole downtown.
Right.
So thinking about that, thinking about the timing, thinking about the way Portland Metro is growing, and that we seem to still have some juice in that realm. These are the what came up for me when I read that you were considering holding off for another year. I'm wondering if maybe necessarily that's the right thing to do.
I think it's a good point. I think, as Allison mentioned, there's a way that we can also work with other funding sources. So there are actually a handful of projects in the capital improvement plan that are intended to do exactly that. And so the way that I see it is that this is a different source that we can use to leverage development on the other side of it. Because as you all well know, I certainly see how important infrastructure is, particularly the block face improvements that are required when there is major redevelopment. There are a handful of projects in the CIP that are anticipated over the next 5 years that we could potentially get a little bit more bang for our buck if we use those transportation funds to build the infrastructure. And I'm not disagreeing with you, I agree with you, but then potentially these resources could be used to do something different. But that's part of the conversation, is to say, what are the priorities? What is the amount of money that we have? And so that's how we would do this process, is we would go in with a budget and say, we've got, by then, $2.5 million. We have 30 years worth of projects. This is what's happened. This is what staff can help do, is sort of say, here's what's happening. Here's what we see in the CIP, in the downtown or in central Milwaukee coming through. And we can start to look at all of those things and give a menu of choices to say, okay, is it infrastructure? Is it this? Because if we have alternate resources, then we're probably going to be better positioned to use our urban renewal funds to do other things in concert with that. So this allows us to have a really open conversation around how do we prioritize that funding and what do we prioritize it for? Because $2 million is gone in a second downtown. And if that's the priority, then that's the priority. But I would say that I think that there are other funding streams. There are other projects that are in the pipeline that I'm really excited about the opportunity to say, okay, how can we start to leverage those infrastructure funds with the limited urban renewal resources that we have? But it allows us to have that conversation with you and with the community as well, is prioritizing that. And so what we can do is sort of stack the deck for you to say, here's what's been done, here's what's planned and funded, and then here are the remaining priorities that were identified in the plan that are near term. And then we can have a community and commission conversation around, okay, what makes the most sense to do over the next several years.
So what is rising to the top for you?
Well, for me, I think one of the main things is the economic development side. So the things that are more of the softer things. So how do we help existing businesses and existing buildings? We have very limited tools in our toolbox to do that. So a good example is I like to think of it as an expanded storefront improvement program. So oftentimes a business, folks are like, we'd love to see a restaurant in there. Well, a grease trap costs 50 grand. Those kinds of things are actually can be funded through an urban renewal program. So just so you know, like the way that I like to define TIF, you can spend it on soft costs associated with physical improvements. So it can be for infrastructure, and basically if you took a building and shook it, anything that sticks to it, right?
Okay.
So it can't be used for furniture or things like that, but it can be used to seismically upgrade something, or it can be used to put in infrastructure for a restaurant and things of that nature.
Or energy efficiency improvements?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and there are also additional alternate resources that could be explored to be paired with that as well. So this allows us to really take a holistic look at, okay, what do we want to try to do over the next several years? And then how do we kind of piece together all the things in order to try to get it done?
Right, so specifically what what I'm thinking about, like the block across the street, right, that's got the aerial
Wires.
things. We are hoping to leverage at least a good portion of that to be at least workforce housing, if not
Yep.
some portion to be low-income housing. If we can save the project $1 million by doing at least the expensive part of the PARs, that's just more leverage that we can push towards more affordable housing in the project.
No, totally agreed. I mentioned earlier that we do have projects in the capital improvement plan, and that is one of them. And we also have a storm facility that's going to need to be replaced on Harrison. That's also in the 5-year CIP. It's adjacent to the site, and so there's likely going to need to be frontage improvements done on the Harrison Street side. So again, this is a way that we can start to stack that. But I hear you.
So is that a thing? Can we, if we were doing a trench for a storm pipe, can you literally have the conduit or the whatever they call it? It's not conduit. What do they call it for the electrical?
Conduit.
Conduit.
Oh, they have another word.
Make it up.
Well, we don't know it.
They don't like to run in the same pipe.
Well, I know they don't like to run in the same pipe, but could they run in the same trench? That's my question.
We have other places where we have trenches running multiple infrastructure pieces. So yeah, you could probably have discussions with PG and others.
Yeah, there's spacing requirements. It happened down in South Downtown, so I'm not going to pretend to know what those are, but I know that we had to do, that's why we did what we did down there,
Right.
because they were going underground anyway. So they did their utility trenching, then you have the franchise utilities, and then you have water and storm, and they all kind of go side by side, but it all happens at once.
Well, I think by the time you come back to us with a plan and we start putting together a CAC, we'll also have a better sense of what's happening with the economy.
Yeah.
And we'll also have another number for, what we've got, because the taxes get paid at the end of the year, right?
Right.
So, well, yeah.
So I just don't remember this from my reading, but what's the criteria for the CIC, both the selection and the work that they're charged with?
I had a feeling someone might ask me, so I will tell you.
You're always
So,
prepared.
It's in the bylaws. So the commission, so you appoint members, and those members should represent each of the following categories. So property owners or business owners from within the urban renewal district, residents from within the urban renewal district, persons with extensive knowledge of finance, accounting, or economics, persons with extensive knowledge of affordable housing development or programs, persons with extensive knowledge of public services, utilities, or infrastructure, and a member of the Milwaukie Redevelopment Commission.
And what's the total number of people supposed to be?
It doesn't say. I think if you appoint one from each one, that's 7. And then you also have 2 non-voting ex officio members representing special service districts, such as the fire district or NCPRD. And then the committee is chaired by the member of the commission that's on that committee. So I think that's, okay, I'm now pointing out I need glasses. 9.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that next step to start to,
Well, I'm seeing some head nods. We like the idea of an action plan. Okay,
Yes.
great. And then we'll come back and we'll have an official conversation around budget, but that helps us start to think about what our work plan and programming is for the next year and a half. But if we're comfortable with pushing debt out for another year, that keeps the pressure on us, which you want. So we'll keep things moving along. So we would go back and kind of discuss what that strategy would look like and then come back to you before we initiate anything further.
Sounds good.
Great.
Yeah.
thank you.
I've been wanting to do this since I got here, so I'm really excited. And I now have Allison here, and she's going to be wonderful in doing this. So we're really lucky to have her.
Awesome,
Great. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Are there any further commission reports?
No.
Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would so move.
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.